I'm interested to see, for instance, how Meta's recent complete abandoning of any kind of, decency and content moderation or support for people who are being harassed will translate to their policies vis-a-vis children, especially the under 13, actual children, not teens. Because what tends to happen with these guys, but with everybody, with policymakers, with pundits, with advocates, is unless they're talking specifically about children, they tend to forget that children even exist. And they don't think through, how is this move going to impact them? And then how will the public react when, horrible things happen? Yeah, I feel like the data itself is murky and it's inadequate. And then to just release that onto the internet, a third of internet users worldwide are under the age of 18.
Yeah.
A third of the people who are going to be interacting somewhere, somehow, have not been adequately included in these data sets and identified appropriately, and really understood, as they behave and act and talk in the wild. It's incredibly problematic. So I'm of two minds, right? I want, of course, there to be guardrails and regulation, but I also want investment in building models that are actually knowledgeable about actual children.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the CEO Retort. I'm your host, Tim El-Sheikh, and in this episode, I'm having a discussion with Professor Sara Grimes, who's one of the world's leading experts and campaigners for children's digital rights and protections online. She is the Wolfe Chair in Scientific and Technological Literacy and a full professor in the Department of Arts, History and Communication Studies at McGill University in Canada. But she's also the author of the award-winning book, Digital Playgrounds, The Hidden Politics of Children's Online Play, Spaces, Virtual Worlds, and Connected Games. Her research and teaching focus on children's digital media cultures and children's rights in the digital environment with a focus on games, because she's a lifelong gamer like your boy over here, so she's my sister in crime. She published multiple papers that explore the commercialization of children's play cultures and creative expression, discussions of children labor and intellectual property in content creation, platforms, responsible AI and children, and the legal and ethical dimensions of marketing to children online. So quite a lot of complicated areas, which we are going to discuss in more detail in this episode, so don't worry about it. She's also the director and founder of the Kids Play Tech Lab, which is a research lab dedicated to understanding emerging trends and issues related to the technologization of childhood and supporting the development of technologies and policies that advance children's rights, free play, and well-being. She is also the principal investigator of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Insight, SSHRC, a grant-funded child-appropriate game design project, which is a cross-cultural exploration of how ideas about age appropriateness impact how digital games are designed, regulated, and played in Canada, the UK, and the United States. And if that's not enough, she's also collaborating on projects funded by the Privacy Commissioner of Canada's Contributions Program, Joe Desjardins, excuse my French, examining privacy and data collection in mobile games and apps targeted to child players. Finally, she's also actively involved in community outreach projects where she regularly speaks at media and tech industry conferences, participates in policy consultations, and engages in action research projects and cross-sector partnerships aimed at building a better, more inclusive, and rights-based children's digital ecosystem. Her current projects include an ongoing partnership with A Game Studios on the development of Rights by Design game for 8 to 12-year-olds that will design children's climate, science literacy, and resilience through fun and empowering play. This project is funded by the Canada Media Fund and Ontario Creates and is part of the Design Well, Play Well community led by the Joan Guns Cooney Centre, UNICEF, and LEGO. So to put it in very simple terms, she knows what she's talking about because this area is actually quite complicated and in fact, it's quite controversial because unfortunately, as is the case with these things, politics are involved always. And in fact, one of the key reasons why I've been campaigning and pushing for digital ethics, responsible AI, and so on, because children have always been, in my opinion, the collateral damage. When you look at the behavior of the tech sector, over the years, it was always about saying, children should not be using these platforms. It's all parents' responsibility, blah, 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 blah. But it's not really that simple. They easily could have added the guardrails. I've been shouting and screaming about this since 2014, where I'm one of the voices that were saying that we should not put AI on the web through social media or any other AI recommendation systems without guardrails. But as usual, they didn't listen because the priority was the clicks, the ads. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. So Sara and I are going to be discussing this in a lot more detail. And I think this episode is particularly important for parents, carers, and teachers, and more importantly, children themselves. Because I think it's important that you understand the risks involved for your children to be online. You might think that you know the risks are, but actually you don't in many cases. The risks involved in children using AI online, because there are no guardrails when it comes to children. One of the key areas that we also discuss is, what is the solution? How can parents, carers, children themselves actually manage their access and safety online? And there's so many different ways that we can do this, which we're going to be discussing here as well. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of topics to talk about in here. And Sara and I will be having multiple conversations in the future for sure. But before we carry on any further, please do me a humongous favor. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure you give us 5 stars, because this absolutely helps the algorithms as well. But also, if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the like button, again, to make sure the YouTube algorithms spread our content all over the place, because this particular topic is super important. But also, if you want to support the podcast further, please feel free to check out all of the sponsors in the description section below. This particular episode is brought to you by Ground News, which is a tool that is absolutely essential if you want to dig through the political bias news, because Ground News has something called the blind spot tool, which basically makes sure that you are aware what are the potential blind spots when you read a particular news on the right of politics or left of politics. You'll be surprised the difference. I mean, even in my case, I actually use Ground News to keep an eye on AI news, and even AI news is influenced by politics. For example, you find that the right-leaning magazines or right-leaning media outlets, they are very, very pro-AI. The ones that are more left-leaning, they're very, very much anti-AI. Both of them are basically complete garbage and wrong in many cases. Blind spot is something that absolutely helps me to make sure that I keep my cognitive bias in check. So make sure you check them out at ceoretort.com/ground news. You get 40% on the Vantage plan, which is their maximum plan that gives you all of their tools, which basically what I use personally. It's super important for me as a business person and as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure it's going to be really important for you. But even for your personal news updates, I think this is something that could potentially help with the current contentious, divisive media ecosystem. I'm trying to be very polite here, but make sure you check them out. It will absolutely support and help the growth of our channel and our podcast as well. So guys, without further ado, I hope you find this conversation insightful. My friends, Professor Sara Grimes. So how are things?
Yeah, things are okay. I mean, it's a weird, dark times, weird year, lots of strange things happening. It's a busy time in kid tech policy, but also a little bit of a frightening time. So yeah, just trying to keep up with everything and fight the good fight, and like it's on this year. So yeah. For a lot of things to happen that we can't anticipate, as well as things that we know are coming down the pipeline. So yeah. I'm okay.
Well, as I said in our last conversation, that I did that episode that was a bit grim back in August 2024, where I was saying that once you involve politics in tech and AI and etc., things would just turn into shit. Now, my anticipation was that it would happen within a 4-year period, as opposed to 4 weeks. So the episode actually that I did, the first episode that we actually published in January 2025, I admitted that I just don't know where we're going now. It's like, because things have materialized so quickly. I mean, I didn't see, for example, Mark Zuckerberg capitulating to Trump in this way. We've seen that with Jeff Bezos, for example. So literally, we're talking about the top 3 dudes in America that control the vast majority of the global information ecosystem. That's oligarchy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, oligarchy with all the power holders, hanging out together and I guess lifting a lot of weights and yeah.
Yeah.
Deciding
So,
the fate of the world with little knowledge or care for how it impacts the rest of us. So, yeah, terrifying.
because effectively, the area that you specialize in, they're basically in control of it right now, in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, like the area that I study and engage with is child involved tech policy, youth tech policy, as well as other things like ethical design and rights by design, which is policy in the sense of like a company's own policy. Their own tenets could include like a commitment to children's rights or best interests and ethics. And they control a lot, like the people you just mentioned, but not everything, because kids are also already kind of in a weird position in a lot of those spaces. Officially banned, officially kind of like very reduced access in a lot of instances. So they're also in other places, and those tech giants like Disney and Roblox, Epic, haven't yet drunk the Kool-Aid and jumped over to the dark side. And we'll see what happens with that. It's I think a little bit of a more complicated set of issues that are going on there. And I'm interested to see, for instance, how Meta's recent like complete abandoning of any kind of decency and content moderation or support for people who are being harassed will translate to their policies vis-a-vis children, especially the under 13, like actual children, not teens.
Yep.
Because like what tends to happen with these guys, but with everybody, with policymakers, with pundits, with advocates, is unless they're talking specifically about children, they tend to forget that children even exist, and they don't think through how is this move going to impact them, and then how will the public react when horrible things happen. So they seem consistently caught off guard by these things. Think of like the horrors of when Meta rolled out the VR spaces that had all those problematic bad actors, both like really criminal like level activity to just people messing around, right, and harassing kids and making them feel terrible, which should also be criminal, but it's not always. This was easily foreseeable, and yet it was like this total surprise, even though we've had 2 decades worth of kids, and various people of various ages interacting in play spaces and having things happen and having to intervene, and having people complain and having kids get harmed or just be really disturbed by what they're encountering. And yet again and again, it comes in as some sort of after the fact reaction, as if it's completely unforeseeable that if children are in a space with no guardrails, no protections, no people looking out for them, that they're not going to, run into risk or worse.
Yeah. And we did warn about it. I mean, you see me on LinkedIn, especially, that I rant about this quite a lot, because like when we were at Google Campus London in 2014, around that time, there was a lot of debate then whether or not you should, or we should, as a sector, we should even consider pushing AI on the web.
Right.
And there were voices, I think even probably even Mo Gaudat at the time. I can't remember if he left Google But for those who don't know, Mo Gaudat was the CEO of Google X, which is like the research and development arm of Google. So that's the brain of Google, as it were. And he quit because he had a really horrible family tragedy. But I'm sure at the time he was one of the major voices that did not want AI to be on the web at all. I personally don't fully agree with that. My position at the time was that we should put AI is fine so long as you have guardrails. You must have human intervention, because the general idea, as is the case with all of the big corporations, is how do we get things quickly out there that can maximize profit? There is no issues with profit. I'm an entrepreneur. I have no issues with profit, but you can't screw people over or completely ignore people's welfare so that you can make extra cash, right? So as you said, I get really annoyed when I see people, oh, this is so surprising. How could this happen? I'm like, what in the hell are you talking about? We, a tiny company, we've been warning this for like 10 years. You had people like Gary Marcus that was warning this, I think, for 20 years even. So, we were out there speaking out. People just didn't listen. The governments didn't, obviously. The corporations didn't. The Facebooks of this world didn't. So now here we are. And I remember when you and I spoke the last time, you used the term that kind of hit me a little bit, even though, it's like we've seen all these problems for quite a long time, children being almost the biggest victims of social networks and the web, etc. But you made a term that children don't have any rights compared to an adult. So if you're an 18-year-old or above, you've got more rights and legal protections online than children. So how the hell did we get here?
Yeah, well, I mean, children do actually have rights, but they're not always enforced or protected in the digital realm. Like that.
So they don't have any online rights. I mean, obviously in the real world, like outside, in the real, they have rights, but I meant online specifically.
They do.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting.
In practice, they're not always respected. So, okay. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child in 2021 released it's called like a general comment, and it's a clarification on how this convention about children's rights applies in certain situations. And this situation, General Comment 25, was all about children's rights in the digital environment. So until 2021, it wasn't that children didn't have rights, but it was really unclear to many different governments, companies, children, people, how exactly they translated to the spaces. Part of that, I think, is the weird status of most online spaces or digital spaces, connected spaces, as like private spaces or quasi-private, quasi-public. And so there really needed to be just a real clear guidance for how the rights that already exist do translate. So the GC25, kind of like General Comment 25, GC25 really made that very explicit. In places like the UK, but many other places, the Netherlands, France, Ireland, places around the world as well, have now brought in their own either guidelines, oftentimes it's like a code, like the children's code in the UK, to further clarify how this applies in their particular context. So children do have rights, but they're not always respected. And there's a lot of status quo that kind of just ignores them. I mean, I think we were maybe talking specifically about children's right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. They do have that right. This is already articulated in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And different countries that have signed on to that, which is all countries in the world except for one, are supposed to protect that right. And guess which is the one that hasn't signed on? Mm-hmm. The big one, right? The United States.
The Big Apple.
Exactly. So in terms of setting the status quo, obviously, with so many big tech companies coming from the States and being, sort of based primarily in the States or sort of focusing first on a US audience. The issue of children's rights has historically not really been there. It's been more like parents' rights. You hear a lot about that. Now what people are doing in the States who are, interested in supporting children and making sure that they do have their rights upheld within a context where it's not actually part of there's no legal obligation or even, commitment to upholding children's rights. They're talking about best interests, and they're talking about how do we, actually they're talking a little bit more about children's rights because they see so many other countries and people talking about it. But they're trying to bring these issues to the forefront, and it's really an uphill battle. But yeah, if we look to other countries, we can see there's been, like, since 2021 especially, a growing movement towards, like, making sure that children's rights are upheld. And, like, that's what makes this such a frustrating turn of events, with, Meta and all of these companies kind of like abandoning user rights. They already were not quite on the bandwagon. Like, they already weren't quite there, but it seemed like they were maybe shifting that way. And yeah, I am always worried about these movements. If they don't gain enough momentum quickly enough, they can fritter out, right? They can kind of like fade. And this is definitely an odd, it's a huge hurdle, and it could result in, I think, a bunch of different possibilities. You have, like, a number of states in the United States that are bringing in child labor laws to apply to social media and to family influencers and child influencers, which is like a really great win for children's rights.
Yep.
And right at this same time, you have states and whole countries, of course, like Australia, they're just like banning unilaterally banning young people under this age or that age from even using, a very ill-defined set of technologies. They'll say social media or, like, phones. Like, it's so broad and ambiguous what that even applies to. What are the exceptions? Can parents override this? And it's always contingent on this particular location. So it's a really, it's a confusing time. It's hard to see what's going to happen next. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure, like, children's rights exist. And there's actually, like, a lot of like governments, a lot of, like, advocacy groups, a lot of academics, children's groups that are really fighting for that to be part of the conversation moving forward with how AI is deployed, how it's regulated, how existing technologies, adapt and move forward from here. But yeah, there's this backlash against just users generally, is almost certainly going to impact and challenge the momentum of that movement, because it's, like, so in the opposite direction.
Yeah. And the thing I always like to remind people, because there's obviously a lot of voices out there that complain and moan about that there's too much regulation, that we need to reduce regulations because regulation, quote unquote, stifles innovation. Now, as somebody that is involved in innovation, I call the bullshit here, because the whole point of innovation, that nothing stifles it. It's like, you literally, whatever challenges or whatever barriers you come across, you try to work out ways around the barriers to actually, if it becomes like with my company, now we see regulations actually as an opportunity for us to figure out, well, how do we make AI models smarter so that they effectively, quote unquote, understand regulations? Because right now, it's literally complete nonsense. And I think you're absolutely right. Is that, like, going back to the point that I remind people that a lot of the issues that we've seen, for example, the rise of children's depression, because as a direct result of social media, self-harm, etc. This is under current regulations and current censorships. So now they're actually reducing that even further. I really don't even want to think what are the potential consequences out there for something like that to happen, for them to completely reduce or even get rid of any guardrails, it seems right now. I mean, they didn't have enough in the first place. And I've seen another report, I can't remember where from, but I will put the link in the description, that I think that Meta as well now, whatever algorithms they had that stopped any harmful information or rather harmful content or misinformation to go viral, while they shutting down these algorithms. I'm like, what is going on? I mean, is this politics? This is beyond politics. This is craziness. It's like this will create a major divide. I think certainly in Europe, they will not accept this. In the UK, I know they would not accept. They might capitulate, but I don't think they could ever allow anything like that to proliferate the European market. And I think it's the same in Canada.
Yeah, Canada has been really slow to bring in regulation on these issues. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Canada around this. There's been moves, of course. They've shut down TikTok Canada, but people are still, we're still allowed to use the American version. I don't know, like now what will
if
happen?
It's not going to be banned.
Yeah, exactly. And will it? Because I heard today or yesterday that the CEO of TikTok is going to be up on the stage at Trump's inauguration. So I don't know.
Yeah, I did hear that I think he's contemplating to reverse it. I use his executive order to reverse the ban.
Right.
I guess the CEO paid him $100. Sorry, not 100. Sorry, 100, but maybe $100 is enough for him. Like everybody seems to be paying him to be there. So probably he paid him the $1 million.
Exactly.
And Trump's like, all right, sold.
Totally worth it to keep your $1 billion platform running. So yeah, that's a good ROI for that guy. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Canada does. We had a number of regulations around, like updating our privacy regulations, introducing AI regulation, as well as an online harms act that was going to strengthen like the ability of law enforcement as well as require tech companies to track down illegal activity, including harassing children. Some of the cases I think that you're referring to in terms of children having, this like harm from using social media, it's actually from these people, right? Who are harassing them or extorting them or abusing them. And because these things are illegal, to make it illegal online, which it like is. And we have had some high profile court cases where these people were brought to justice, including, high profile cases. But it's been like the ability to track these things down before they become, these worst case scenarios has been quite hindered by things like, it's freedom of speech, or
exactly. I was about to say that.
Users are uploading and sending messages, and we can't control that, and shifting the responsibility. And that act is also off the table now. We're having, a big shift in the government. Our prime minister just stepped down, and that means that all of the bills that were being debated and had been revised a gazillion times and had finally had cross multi-partisan support are now who knows what will happen to them. So it's not that Canada won't react, but in terms of how we react from a regulatory perspective, it's going to be a while before much happens beyond privacy infringement, because those laws are still on the books, and our privacy commissioner is pretty awesome. So
will it depend who will become your new prime minister potentially? Because obviously I don't know his name, but the conservative leader who, I mean, I'm not fully in touch with the Canadian politics, so I apologize. But from what I've read is that he's effectively Canada's Trump, perhaps not as bad, but bad enough apparently. Is that the case?
He's bad enough from our perspective, but we're all quite to the left of the States. I mean, he would be probably equivalent to a Democrat. But the scary thing,
so it's like Joe Biden.
Yeah, he would be around there. compared to, like we have much more, kind of like union and environment focused, and um, focused on poverty and more social services focused parties in Canada. So the Conservative is always like they're right of these left. And that's not to downplay it, because he is doing a lot of things like in a milquetoast kind of level that Trump has done, in terms of like, flirting with populism. And he's gone to some events with some people who are quite right wing, who are, racist and Nazi, I don't know, fans or Nazi adjacent. And he's been at those events. That's super worrisome. What it's actually going to mean, is he like a big fan of Trump's proposal to take over our country? He's been quiet on that front. I think he doesn't know how to play it. He is a career politician. He's always been a federal politician, like in the federal government politics. He's been an MP. Well, you know what that is, because you're from England. He's been an MP since he was in his early 20s. He's never done anything but this. So, he knows how to play the game, ish. But I don't think I wouldn't describe him as equivalent to Trump at all. Like, I think that are equating Trump with someone who is like actually operating within the, rules and understanding of what governments are supposed to do is like we're flattering Trump by doing that. Because the stuff that he's doing is so, it's absurd, it's completely absurd. And I mean, he tried to he tried to, prevent the next president from coming in. Like the things that he's done have been so outlandish. So as much as I am not a fan of Poilievre, who's the person we're talking about in Canada, and definitely won't be voting for him, he is nowhere in that realm. Trump is really, Trump is extreme, and Poilievre may go that way, but he's not there yet.
We don't know. I mean, because we had Boris Johnson, didn't we? I mean,
yeah, I know.
It's like the thing is, even though I was never his fan, but actually as a London mayor, because he was a London mayor before he became prime minister, and he was way more left wing than when he was prime minister. He just jumped on the bandwagon for Brexit. So it's really, what, I mean, even though I try not to label myself as anything from political perspective, but I never liked the conservative movement, purely because this whole idea of conservatism makes no sense to me. I'm a scientist. I believe in progress. I believe in new things. These guys don't. But it's just the fact that, certainly from the UK's perspective, that every time you look at whatever policies that have pushed, it never benefited the UK. It actually damaged the UK economically, socially, even from the innovations perspective. They're the ones that keep on cutting innovations. And even though they're going about, we want the economy to grow, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, at the same time, they cut funds for innovation and research and stuff like that, which is like, that makes no sense, right? So it really all depends, whatever agenda that they have. And since Brexit, the thing that we certainly noticed here in the UK, and I kind of called this out in that video I was talking about, it's the same people that brought us Brexit are the ones that now in control of Trump 2025, not Trump 2016. Arguably, you would say Trump 2016 was probably a bit under control. Right now, this is sort of the Brexit level of Trump, but on steroids. So it seems to be like an international movement going on in here. It's literally the same people. So perhaps it would be the same people that tried to pull the strings in Canada, that may want Canada to have a referendum, like your own Brexit referendum, to become an American state. And actually, I can't see that happen. I think it'll be a revolution in Canada.
Never happen. I'm not saying that there aren't Canadians who are Trump supporters. There are. Of course. But the vast majority of Canadians would absolutely not stand for that. And if they did it by force, I do believe that it would be a fight. Like, we're not, we're not nothing. And we've got a lot of friends. So yeah, I don't see it happening, but things keep happening that I could never
That's surprise. Exactly. I was about to say. I mean, who ever thought that we would be here? It's like it's crazy. Which actually, I think that is relevant to the work that you do in communications, right? Because of course, now you're specialized specifically in children, and basically the impact of technology on children's health, mental health, but also their general experience online, etc. So, but I mean, what I would like to understand more, because that's one of the things that I love doing with every guest, is like, because from my experience, when I meet anyone that has this very kind of focused area of expertise, there's always a personal story there. So I'm interested to know, what is your personal story that made you feel that you that compelled you to campaign, because you are an avid campaigner. So this is not just, it's you spend your entire academic career, professional career, and you're campaigning for children's right online. So what's the story that led you there?
Yeah. The story that led me.
Take your time. We've got plenty of time.
Yeah. So I think there's like kind of two things that coincided. First was, I had this kind of false start in my first year of university. I started off in engineering, and kind of more, because that was like heavily recommended. And my dad especially thought that would be really great for me. And like, I get it. I like to problem solve, and I am very methodical, and there, it made sense on a level, but I hated it. And I did poorly, and I took a gap year after that first year. And I was thinking about, what did I really want to do? What I really wanted to do was like make, or maybe not hands-on make, maybe like produce, like be somehow involved in making media for children. So like, when I really thought about it, this is like the thing that brought me so much joy. I have 4 younger siblings, and some of them are a lot younger than me. I've been around kids my whole life. And, there was like, it just seemed like a place where fun things could happen, enjoyable things, like some learning literacy things. And I thought I had a good sense of what would be like a high quality, type of media experience for kids. Okay, so I go into communications to do that. And kind of like, I'm focusing on all the things, children's TV and child psychology, and taking some sociology of the family, and getting myself set up. And as I'm in university, so this is around, the turn of the millennium, right? Like late 90s, early zeros. Game studies started to become a thing. And some of the classes and some of the readings were about video games, but they were completely off the mark. They were clearly written by people who had expertise that was valid and great, but they were applying it into a new media that they obviously had never played and didn't have any kind of experience of. And they were saying things specifically about kids and video games that were really just really contrary to everything that I myself had experienced as a kid who grew up playing video games. I still play them. I've always loved them. My friends have all played them, always. It's like, that's how I become friends with people often. And from what I was seeing as well, it was these, sweeping assumptions. It was reactionary and fear-mongering kinds of statements. And, I started to engage with that and write papers about, well, that's not what it's actually like to play a video game. And also, they're not all the same. There's different games.
Right. Just a quick interruption, because I think we do have a few younger listeners that probably don't know what you're talking about. But there was a period I remember where experts, quote unquote, were saying things like, oh, children who play games, they're the ones who become criminals. And they would, at some point, all the shootings they see in America, oh, they blamed the shoot 'em up games. And it's completely, because I'm like you, I'm a gamer my entire life, still am today. I loved shoot 'em up games. And last time I checked, I did not shoot anybody.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite. Actually, as you said, made friendships and so on. It's actually a phenomenal experience. I even encourage, as a parent, I am actually encouraging my kids to play games. Beat that. So yeah, but I thought it's important for the younger listeners who might not know what you're talking about in terms of what happened in that period. That there was like, yeah, any violence, they blamed games on violence, which is like, yeah, it's ridiculous, obviously.
It is ridiculous. And actually, I bet you at least some of the younger listeners know exactly what this is because it's still happening, right?
Yeah.
We still are hearing about
Call of Duty, blame Call of Duty and all this stuff.
Someone, they arrest or they, some mass shooting happens in the States. And one of the things that they talk about is like, did he play games? And these are the games he played. So, I mean, yeah, but it was really at a crescendo, right? At that period. So I started writing about games and kids. And when it was time to, go into my graduate studies, I decided to focus on that. And I was really interested in not just, critiquing what people were saying. Like, yeah, that's part of academia, but you also have to, have something to say. And I was really interested in children's rights as a way of thinking about the good stuff, but also admitting that there is some bad stuff that happens sometimes. I was more concerned with actually commercialization and data harvesting that was going on in games. And I was writing a lot about that. And I was trying to figure out, like, how do we, intervene here without it falling into these traps of making exaggerated, unfounded claims, or ignoring the good, or promoting bans, and what ended up happening in that era, not listening to any of that because it's based on kind of like these inflammatory reactionary arguments, and then doing nothing instead, which is what happened, right? Yeah. People were saying, absurd things about games and their impacts, but then it resulted in no regulation, really. It was, age-based content ratings determined by the industry themselves, and who was allowed to sell certain games. And you could sell an M for mature rated game to a parent, but not to a child. But apart from that, there wasn't any kind of like monitoring or interest even in looking at what was happening. So you have the incorporation of online chat, text-based chat, and then eventually voice chat. You have companies starting games for, like, mostly the main business model is collecting data.
Yeah.
Like Habbo Hotel, a lot of these really popular games throughout those zeros and tens, they were free to play, or they had, a tiered system, and they sold their market research data on the side, and sold data sets, like what we know how valuable data sets are now. At the time, it was hard to really call attention to that. But it was a privacy right infringement potentially, right? People were more concerned with people's names and addresses, but they were beginning to see that this like deep behavioral data and the way that you could link it to like a parent's credit card. So, now you do actually have their address, was valuable. And so that became kind of a way of focusing on like what I actually initially set out to do, which was, I want to be involved in making like high quality, awesome, fun media content for kids. And that has expanded to technology more generally. But I feel like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is like in like towards this goal of making sure that the digital experiences that kids have are high quality and fun, and they can explore and take risks, but that aren't like doing things that infringe on their rights, their well-being, and like their, not just their futures, but their present, like how they actually experience the world.
Yeah. And going back to the data side, because there's obviously a lot of similarity in terms of what I like to describe sort of this aggressive data grab of children and people, especially now. And again, this is not the first time. Do you remember the era of big data? I mean, that was quite ridiculous. But of course, it led us to where we are today with generative AI. And of course, now they want to add generative AI in gaming, and in NPCs and that kind of thing. There's already a few things coming out with generative AI in games, which to me, as a gamer, that sounds cool because you can interact with characters. But I think, again, with children, because we have seen incidents where generative AI was quite harmful for children. Like, for example, we've seen with character AI, I kind of talked about this and reported it on LinkedIn. These people came up with these horrible things like, pedophilic generative AI chatbots and chatbots that promote self-harm or encourage kids even to do these things. I mean, where do you see generative AI fitting within this picture now? Because obviously they've grabbed all the data, they're still grabbing all the data, but now we're entering what I described it actually by recent episode is Internet of Shit, because it's like effectively we are combining the AI generated slop, because all the future AI models now, they're going to be trained with AI generated content. I think, was it Bloomberg? I think that reported that something like 50 or 60% of their articles now are written by AI. BuzzFeed, I think that did the same thing, that they wanted to fire most of their journalists or something like that so that they can have more AI driven content. So we're literally already seeing a deluge of AI generated slop. And of course, now we've got the tech dudes that decided to get rid of all the guardrails for misinformation. We're going to have more misinformation and garbage from users and some horrible individuals as well all over the world. What's going to happen to children now if they're being exposed to all of that?
Yeah, it's urgent. This is an urgent question. You have all these countries that are bringing in AI policies and companies that are bringing AI policies that don't even mention children. They don't even mention them. You have like the deployment of these tools, like last year, when and the year before, when like ChatGPT was first made available to everybody and everyone's starting to use Midjourney. I looked right away at all the terms of service policies, and all of them banned children under 13, sometimes children under 18 or children under 16, so including children and teens, in the fine print. So I don't know, like who reads those, but it showed, what it showed was like just kind of like a shirking of responsibility by trying to make themselves not liable, right, for what if children were using the service, at the same time promoting like use of these tools in classrooms at elementary school age. So it's completely contradictory, but a liability thing, also showing that they're not like taking it seriously, that they need to have a child safety policy, right? They like, this is what they're doing instead. So that was like right out of the gate. And then the third issue, like that this kind of like, I think is part of this, is we've had decades now where children have been occupying a really strange space on the internet. I mentioned not being allowed officially to use, Instagram and Facebook. There's a lot of places like this where children, not teenagers, but children have not been officially allowed. And so how is their data even tagged? We know they know, the tech industry, like they know that there are children on their sites. but how are they categorizing them? There's a big report that came out a couple of months ago talking about like Google and some of the different companies just kind of like having this ambiguous category for children, like non-defined, so that they don't have to be responsible for, and not to pinpoint Google. Like, I think that this has become the industry norm.
Yeah.
Until, like, if there's someone on the site who you're not sure the age, you kind of put them in that category. And if you're not really monitoring for this, then, you kind of leave it there and don't worry about it until something blows up and there's a whistleblower, and then you have to. But the point of this is, like, what is the data that AI models are being trained on about children? Is it children who are pretending to be teens so that they don't get
they can,
off
exactly.
Is it influencers on YouTube? Are they going into places where children are actually playing? Do they see that as like representative, or are they thinking that parents' pictures of their children on Instagram to build up a following as a family influencer or lifestyle influencer, that's what kids actually look like? Like, what does AI think about children? I'm really interested in this, because thinking about like the early struggles, and still to this day, for a lot of facial recognition software in being able to track a child, because they change, right?
Yeah.
They grow and change, and it's like it's a super weird, like statistically improbable situation, right? Like, how could this be? This face is completely different. So like thinking about that, and like what were the faces that AI was like the facial recognition AI driven software, what were the images that they were trained on? Was this a large sample? We already know that it was biased in terms of like having like a over representation of white people, boys and men, like it. So what is that? And then looking at the behavioral data and like, how do kids talk to each other? Like, if they're pulling from sites where there were tight guardrails and restrictions on the chat, that is not a super representative sample of how kids actually talk to each other. And if they're pulling from these spaces where kids weren't allowed to be but were anyway, they're being misidentified and not necessarily labeled as 8, or 9 or 10 or just under 13. So yeah, I feel like the data itself is like murky and it's inadequate, and then to like just release that onto the internet, a third of internet users worldwide are under the age of 18.
Yeah.
A third of the people who are going to be interacting somewhere, somehow, have not been adequately included in these data sets and identified appropriately, and really understood, like, as they behave and act and talk in the wild. It's incredibly problematic. So I'm of two minds, right? I want, of course, there to be guardrails and regulation, but I also want investment in building models that are actually knowledgeable about actual children, because sometimes 8-year-olds say swear words, like, and AI needs to know that happens sometimes. Like, they need to understand the realities of what kids actually are like, that they're not, the completely safeguarded, censored version that you see in heavily child safe spaces. And they're not they're not these ambiguous characters that they have marked as possible kids. So yeah, it is the, like, urgent on all levels, basically.
And do you think then, because obviously you made a very good point, because children, when they're online, they don't actually behave like children. And as a result of that, sorry?
Like, they do, but it's not the way we imagine, right?
But the way, absolutely. Which, of course, it then confuses the algorithms, because what algorithms do, it's psychographic modeling. It's about trying to figure out the behavior of the user, etc. But the algorithms effectively assume that the user is not actually a child, and I think this is where I think all companies failed in at least thinking about that from the safety perspective. So is it correct to say that the reason why we're seeing a sort of disproportionately larger number of children that are being negatively impacted by tech compared to adults, is that the reason? Is it because they've been dragged into this pretty murky world that children should not actually see in the first place as a result? I mean, for example, I mean, Meta should not have allowed videos of people, self-harming to be there in the first place. I mean, that's already failure from Meta's perspective. And I think this is something that I really don't understand, why authorities aren't regulating companies to make sure that they have some kind of an editorial input in here, like to say, well, actually, no, that's the kind of content that we cannot allow. And perhaps somewhere in the T&Cs, they'll say, actually, we should not put bad content, but no one is checking.
Right.
Who cares then, right? But I'm just wondering, I mean, I haven't seen any studies with that, but I'm just asking you. I mean, do you think there's a link here that because children are not understood by the algorithms are basically treating them, or rather not keeping them protected from bad content, and as a result, they get exposed to bad content, and as a result of that, they suffer, and we see these horrible statistics. And of course, with Meta again, how many children that committed suicide, and the parents took Meta to court as a result of that? Is that all linked? Or am I being a bit conspiratorial here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of different things going on there. I mean, what the research says about like social media's impact on mental health is not like conclusive, right? There's not like evidence of a direct causal link, because there's a lot of other things. Like we talked about this at the beginning, these are instances where young people, children and teens, were attacked and abused and like taunted, and encouraged and pushed by people through a platform. And it's, these things also happen in the real world, and they're horrible, but it's a lot harder for some random person, especially like a random adult, to follow my child around, from school to home at 2 a.m, saying horrible things to them. In fact, like hopefully that would be impossible for them to do. And that's what like the technology enables. And when there's no moderation, no flagging, and the kids don't feel empowered to report it or feel like they can't complain to a grown-up, or don't have a person in their lives that they can confide in, which sadly is, that does happen. Then it's just, it can seem like it's out of control, obviously. Like the access is just, it's so great. When do we realize we have a mental illness? It's like adolescence and young adulthood. So in terms of vulnerability, like, most vulnerable. I'm a university professor, and we have like all kinds of training and all these resources that the university provides to students, because we're dealing with the age where it's like, this is the peak for serious mental illness revealing itself. And they don't know. The kids don't know. Their parents don't know, so we're all looking for these warning signs. And there's nothing like that happening in social media, even though it's heavily used by, these same age groups and younger. So, I mean, like, I think that you're right, though, like about the content, because I don't think of AI agents, chatbots, as people. I know that they're trying to be like people, but they're still just content. And it's like the content being trained in these ways that are incredibly irresponsible and partial. The assumption that it's an adult. I mean, there's context is everything, right? And this is really what, I mean, I haven't seen the most powerful AI technologies and generative AI. That's like closed doors. I don't see that stuff. But the stuff that I am seeing, like the things that I'm engaging with at work and the things that I'm using, in my research, which are the tools that are commonly available. It's like context is really hard for a lot of these models. Like they don't quite get it. So it's like, do they think that the person is just joking? Like, do they think that they can just kind of like ride this out in some sort of fantasy way? Or like, yeah, and the kids too, right? Do they themselves think it's just a joke at first? Do they also just think it's a fantasy that they're riding out at first, until bigger problems that are happening start to converge with this dark pattern that they're on, a spiral down into really dark kind of content being pushed on them. So yeah, it's complicated, absolutely. But yeah, I think that the more these spaces are designed with the idea that the only way to keep kids safe is to bar them, and otherwise just kind of like ignore the problem, the more of these horrible issues and horrible, tragedies that you describe with the parents of these children are going to happen, because the technologies are being used in all these ways. There's all kinds of bad actors who are mobilizing them. That's also training AI.
Yeah. And it's a lot easier. People don't realize that it's so easy to break the guardrails right now. With
yes.
It's I saw this research actually. I mean, I haven't finished reading it, but oh my, they, the necromancer, right? But they created it's like a way of jailbreaking one of like some of these Gen AI models, that they created like a digital necromancer, but I can't remember what they called it. Was it called the promptomancer or something like that? I mean, like, I'll find it. I'll put it in the description for the listeners. Right. But effectively, it's like a demon, and you put that demon within the model, and you can break it. It's that simple. There are ways to manipulate it, because obviously we do this with my company, who have access to some of these models at the server level through Microsoft and Amazon and so on. And it's like the context is something that they do struggle with. And the reason is because they're not intelligent. There is no intelligence in there. This is something that I've been like shouting and screaming again for like almost 20 years. It's like, stop anthropomorphizing AI. Yeah. Okay, there is knowledge there. Yes, there is, a sort of what's the word, like a simulated intelligence, but it's not real intelligence. I can write an algorithm right now that will cry if it feels that you're sad. It does not mean that it understands that you're sad. It doesn't understand your sadness. It doesn't understand your emotion. It's an algorithm. And I think people don't understand that. And of course, children don't understand that. Children, they get attached to things as well. Especially at a certain age, they in the same way that they get attached to their toys. Imagine you give them something that does actually can potentially create an emotional connection, like we've seen in the movie Her, but with children. I mean, that's all possible, and it's doable. And I think this is why I personally think there has to be some kind of regulation that says, okay, there has to be certain limits. Yes, use it, but don't abuse it, right? In a way. But the other thing you mentioned as well, I just want to see your opinion on that, because I do see, again, the typical argument when it comes to children that it's parents' responsibility. Now, to some extent, yes, but I feel it's unfair to put all the pressure on parents, because not all parents understand tech either. Oh. Okay, parents like us, yes. But the average Joe on the street that doesn't know what Gen AI is, and and there's been research again on that show that a lot of parents, they thought that their children were using their chatbots, whatever, for homework or whatever, but they didn't realize that these chatbots are capable of creating emotional connections. So some of these teenagers, for example, they wanted to have sexual connections or conversations with these chatbots. Some of them actually built some kind of weird emotional connections with them. And again, others have experienced the things that I've mentioned as well. The chatbots encourage, self-harm, that kind of stuff. Parents are totally unaware of this. So how can we blame parents for that? I don't think it's fair, is it?
It's not fair. I mean, what I always tell parents or parent groups when I'm talking to them is I think it's actually impossible for parents to stay up to date on all of this. It's my full-time job, and it is overwhelming, and like I do it all day, and I also do it as a parent, in the evenings. Other people have like other jobs, right? They're not let me play children's games all day to figure out what this Roblox site is about. I'm in a very unique position, and yet I'm still constantly running to catch up with everything that's happening, because it moves fast, trends change, different kids are so different. Like that child who developed a love relationship with the chatbot, their brother or sister never would have in a million years, and so even like in a family, knowing how each child is going to react to each of these different things, interactions, is really, it's everything. Like, it takes so much time. I think like one of the real tricks that industry, but also policymakers have been playing on us for the past, since the advent really of the, accessible internet in the 90s, publicly accessible internet, is like this idea that the parent is in charge. The parent needs to make the choices themselves. This sounds great, right? This is like, of course, I raise my own children. I'm not going to let them tell me if they can play with this, teddy bear or this, toy Lego. That's my decision and my child's decision. And that sounds fantastic. But the delegation of responsibility onto the parents, it would be a full-time job for any of them to keep up with all of the technologies that their kids are engaging with. And what are the implications? That's not even something that you can access very easily. Yep. Are you going to read every privacy policy? Are you going to read every terms of service? Is that even going to tell you anything? Terms of service contracts in kids' platforms, all the platforms, for years told us that they were collecting data for AI training. They weren't calling it that. It was, third part research and development. Very ambiguous. Yeah. No, we don't know what that means. It must be to make the game better. It must be to make this platform
personalization, convenience.
Personalization. Yeah, exactly. It sounds great. It's all like consumer terms, consumer friendly. But it's an impossible task. Like, every parent would need to be a lawyer, a tech engineer, or like an academic who studies these things constantly and and that's your job. So you get paid to do that. So you're allowed to spend your day doing that. I think it seemed possible at first, and it is impossible now. And when I talk to parents, I tell them they shouldn't feel the helplessness that they do feel often about this stuff. Because it's normal that they feel that way. They've been tasked with an impossible task. Plus, they're also raising their children, navigating all the other huge challenges associated with that. So, delegating it onto the parents it's a bait and switch in a way. It's like a way to not have to do anything, It's a way of making it all like consumer choice, but it's not. How do you choose that? In COVID times, when we were all pushed to online, I don't know how it went down in the UK, but like in our school board, the kids were all put on Google, and it was like, oh, do you know anything about this platform? Like, now they all have Google accounts. Like, what are the implications of this? So that it's like parents didn't have a choice in that instance. And we don't have a choice with most of the ed tech that's being used in the school. So even that fictitious, that's idea that all the parents are, the personal managers of all of this, it's not true. When I bring my child to the doctors, they're also using technologies, recording all kinds of data. Those technologies are increasingly AI driven. use the data for all kinds of things. Like, I don't have a choice there. It's a fiction, and it's not that we shouldn't have a voice in decisions. Absolutely. But companies shouldn't be allowed to hide things, lie to us, make things impossible to understand, do things that we're not aware of, overload us with tiny, insignificant decisions, in order to avoid having responsibility for, being guardians of their spaces. And working with parents, and with the kids, of course, because the kids are the ones who know the most about what they're doing online. And wouldn't it be great if we had better mechanisms in place for them to feel empowered to complain when something goes wrong, to not feel that they're going to get banned from the space just because, a dangerous person was there? Because that's often why kids don't tell a parent or report it. They're worried that they are the ones who are going to get in trouble. And the bad actors that we were talking about earlier, they prey on that. They know that.
But also the support system in a lot of these companies is pretty crap, because like you try to contact support. I hear and read so many stories of victims. I mean, like, we're not talking about, I mentioned these children that are, been through all these horrible things. And the common message that I see from all of the reporting, that parents just do not know who to talk to. Yes. Like they don't know, where do you go at Meta? Who do you talk to Meta? Where do you contact? Who do you contact? And it's like, and they make it really, really hard to do.
Yes.
It's like as if, again, I don't know if that's true, but it's like as if they don't want people to complain to them. It's like, wait, look, it's too much work and blah, blah, blah. I mean, ultimately, this is why I tend to get a little bit aggressive with these things sometimes. It's like, I feel that it's prioritizing profits. I mean, there's no other way of explaining this. And I speak, again, maybe it's my personal experience, but when I share this story with people, people say, yeah, actually, that's true. It's like, I mean, I've been through the whole VC thing with my previous companies as well. And they don't care about ethics. Not as individuals. Individuals, they probably care. If you say to them, like, surely children should be safe, etc., they say, yeah, of course. But if you, as a VC, yeah, but how much is that going to cost? What impact will that have on our share value? What impact will that have on our profitability, et cetera, et cetera? And, you mentioned the pandemic. You probably noticed that how the share value of all of the tech companies just went like that.
Yeah.
So the economy was down, yet their share values went like this, upwards, which makes no sense. But obviously, because to them, it was like, hallelujah, everybody's online, right? We've got more data. Hurrah.
More engagement.
Sorry?
More engagement.
Oh, yeah, of course. More engagement, better personalization, right? This is the thing that frustrates me because, you've probably seen me repeat this on LinkedIn as well a lot, is that I genuinely, personally, as a tech entrepreneur, I honestly believed in the idea that we can use technology to make the world a better place. And like, I know it's a bit of a cliche now. It's a typical cliche that is meaningless. But 15 years ago, that was actually, I speak again for myself, some of the companies that I met at Google campus in London and stuff, all of us were AI companies that were building AI to solve a problem. We weren't like doing anything random. DeepMind were one of the cohorts. They wanted to solve complex scientific problems with AI. I wanted to solve with my company the misinformation problem in science and healthcare. That was already a problem back in 2014, 2012 even, right? So it's not new. Other guys would try to improve cybersecurity. I mean, there's always something. Like, everybody was very like mission driven. And I just, for me, we reached a point now where I always tell people we have actually got the technology to solve a lot of these problems. And, we talk about generative AI. Generative AI, if done correctly and designed by parents, for example, that understand how children think rather than, a new graduate or whatever, you can actually use generative AI as a way of helping kids that have mental health challenges to communicate. Because some children, for example, when they feel sad or down or whatever, they just don't want to talk. It's like trying to get something out of them is a really, really difficult thing. So actually using generative AI can be that first step that you help them kind of open up a little bit more. So So there's definitely positivity that we can use AI for, and great outcomes, but it costs more money. And I speak from experience with my company, right? Like, we try to do ethics and prioritize ethics. It costs more money, it takes more time, and it's not attractive to VCs. I had conversations with VCs generally, and they were like, yeah, Tim, why are you focusing on that bullshit? I'm like, bullshit? Because it's too expensive. Right. I mean, ultimately, this is it. I mean, it's my theory, but when I speak to a lot of people about this, like other entrepreneurs, and they say, well, actually, yeah, it's exactly the same. We feel that it's all about shareholder class maximizing profits. Whatever happens to the rest of society and people, we don't care. Yeah. So what one of the things that I like to do as well is, like, I always try to be positive. What is the solution? Is that, I mean, of course, there's no, we can't have one solution. I think it's impossible now, right? But for example, with parents, how can we help parents? How can we help children? Because obviously, again, the third category we can talk about, I presume, I guess, is the education system. They blame schools. Oh, how come schools don't teach these things? I volunteered, present at schools to talk to them about AI and stuff. Teachers don't know anything about AI. I mean, how would a history teacher know how generative AI works and help children to use generative AI safely? I mean, so that's another issue as well. So what is the solution?
Let's talk about three things, because you're right, it would be so many things, right?
Yeah.
But I think the three urgent ways forward towards a solution, together towards a solution. The first is to involve children in the conversations, because they're the ones who are experiencing this. They're also...
when you say conversations, as in by whom? By like politicians, the tech sector, etc.
Yeah. Yes, everybody. Everybody who's doing this, who's either talking about regulating it, or who's designing it, who's deploying it, who's incorporating someone else's AI technology into their, existing system, need to be aware that children exist. Okay, I guess that's the first step, but including young people as knowledge keepers of what's going on in the kid environment. What are kids saying about these things? How are they experiencing them? What are their concerns? Do they really not know that the chatbot is not alive? Or are they worried about encountering someone in a game and it actually being an AI? Where's the real priority area for them? Are they more worried about being deceived, or are they worried about losing touch with reality? Wouldn't this be good to know what children of different ages, because it's going to be different for a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old, right? What are the concerns, and then how can we move forward in a way that takes those concerns seriously, as well as their hopes, because kids also have hopes for AI and have optimism for AI. We talked to when we were doing the children's consultation for the GC25 that we talked about way at the beginning of the interview. The kids that we talked to, 700 plus kids from around the world, were super optimistic and saw so many benefits with the digital environment, all these different technologies. And they saw all kinds of downsides and risks, and there were things that they didn't like, but they saw lots of potential, and they didn't want to not have access. And the same thing is coming out with emerging research on kids and AI. They don't want to be left behind. They want to know more about it. They want it to do things that are helpful to them. So they also have hopes here. The second thing is to think about AI regulation as something that needs to consider and support children's rights. Children shouldn't be included in these things as just victims. They will be vulnerable. At times they're going to be more vulnerable. They don't have as much experience. Their emotional regulation is still developing. it's true these things need to be considered, but they also have rights. They'll have rights to information. They have the right to know when something's false. They have the right to express themselves and engage in culture. And how are those things going to be protected in how we decide to move forward with codes or with policies and laws? And the last is, you hit the nail on the head, literacy. And governments should be investing huge in training teachers at all levels. All levels of education are currently incorporating AI technologies by people who are responsible for teaching children, teens, young adults, who sometimes don't even know the technologies are being used, don't know how to use them. In many universities, the way that professors outside of computer science are responding to generative AI is you're not allowed to use it. And it's it's
ridiculous to me.
It's the social media ban. It's too complicated to deal with you young people who don't yet know how to write an essay. Fact, some do, but some don't.
Yeah.
Bypassing that, by using ChatGPT or whatever. So we're just going to ban it. It's too complicated to deal with, so we're going to ban it. And it of course, because there's no training, there's no emphasis being put on that, right? But we do need it. And, we need to be able to learn with children and young people. Parents need to learn about it. Pediatricians need to learn about it. We all need to learn about technologies. And this should happen right away because they're already being deployed everywhere. They're at the border, social services uses them, the medical system uses them, the education system uses them, kids are using them, the content that they're watching, on YouTube has it. It's now, and we all need to know our rights, and we need to know what the limits are, as well as, how to use them, how to maximize the benefits, and how to deal with the challenges. So yeah, it's not a small task, but think of the possibility that you mentioned, what this technology, these multiple technologies could do, could be amazing if we did it right, if we all kind of work together to make sure that it's done in a way that's benefiting us and helping us, and not putting it out in the worst possible way to see what happens. When are we ever allowed to do that as researchers?
That's the thing. I mean, that's the thing that frustrates me. I think I sort of mentioned this question to you. It's where I always ask myself, at what point did these founders wake up and say, you know what, my technologies just caused the death of certain people, X number of people, X number of children, but hey, it's a collateral damage.
Right.
There has to be a point, because I admit it. I think, again, going back to the point that, people focus so much on money. Now, again, nothing wrong with money. Money is great. All right. But surely you can't do that at the expense of people's lives, I mean, right. I don't understand, because I did say to people, probably I would have been a hell of a lot richer than I am right now if I did what the other dudes did. But I can't. I'm not an angel, but the idea that I would wake up, that somebody would come to me and say, hey, Tim, that tech that your company created, somebody just died from that. For me, this is whoa. So this is the question I always ask. There must have been a point where these guys woke up one morning, because I don't believe that they started out, people, get a little bit crazy on social media and say, oh, Zuckerberg is evil, blah, blah, blah. It's nothing to do with evil, but certainly there was a point where they had to make that choice, right? It's okay, do we prioritize profits or do we prioritize people? And unfortunately, obviously, profits had to come first, whether it was their choice or the shareholders had to, push them because it's their fiduciary duties. It's the whole system for me. That's why I just walked away from all of it. For me, I had even some investors recently emailing me, said, Tim, but Tim, you keep on saying that investors do this, blah, 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 blah. But I don't do that. And I said, yeah, I know, probably you don't, but I will still not invite you to be my investor. You know why? Because the system prioritizes you. So that investor could literally turn up one day and say, you know what, Tim, I don't want to be the nice investor anymore. I'm forcing you to do this and this and this as your shareholder. This is the issue for me. It's like the system prioritizes shareholders. So shareholders are more important than you, the employee, or you as a customer or consumer. Shareholders come first. That's why I can't have investors. I do not want investors. And I think, and I'm seeing more startups emerging that they try to do the same, that they're saying, you know what, we can't be part of the system because this is ridiculous, actually. But we need the money, but the governments aren't giving us the money. So it's a bit of a bizarre situation. And it's the reason why I say that I feel everything that you said, I fully agree with. But the issue is, who's going to do that? Governments aren't going to do it. Or if they're doing it, they're way, way too slow. Corporations now, in light of what we talked about earlier with Trump and the whole thing, it's like obviously they walked in the complete opposite direction. So we are effectively on our own as people. So what can we do? I suppose, I guess, parents. Are there any resources available that parents can use for them to understand? Okay, how do I manage my child's access to AI in a way that makes sense to me? As say a parent who doesn't know anything about tech, are there any resources like that?
Yeah.
For example,
yes. And in the UK, you have some of the best. So, but the Alan Turing Institute has been doing research on responsible AI in children for years, and they have all kinds of information. Some of it is a little bit like geared towards academics, but a lot of the stuff on their website is quite like accessible. They have events. They invite children for consultations. They have like child, public events that are targeted to kids, and that would be targeted to kids and their parents. The Children's Parliament in Scotland has also been like heavily engaged in thinking about children's rights in the digital realm, and increasingly in terms of their relationship and use by AI technologies. Like when AI technologies use you, but you're not using them back.
Yeah.
Yes. So there are quite a few, I think, sources of information that are out there, and there's a growing interest in kind of not forcing change, but I guess inspiring change and providing those types of resources. So there's organizations like Everyone AI that are very much dedicated to promoting responsible AI development and deployment vis-a-vis children. And I think a lot of academics like myself, who are already in this space, we're starting to figure out how to like band together. I wrote a policy brief for CFAR just last year with a number of new colleagues around Canada, looking at what are the ways forward for responsible AI in children. And that was also written for a lay audience, if you will. It was written to speak to people across disciplines, and hoping that parents and teachers read it too. And then I think that banding together and kind of creating like networks would be a good way to make the resources like this, because they're here and there, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they're scattered.
You're listening and you're like Googling all the things I'm saying, and you're finding some of them, and others you're not going to find right away because it's not like a paid search result, or Google's AI doesn't want you to see it. Like, who knows, right? But yeah, I think that the next step is definitely a global network that will bring together some of these resources. So I think there is a lot that parents can do in their homes and in their interactions that have to do with adopting a different role from the one that we usually play in our relationships with our children, where we usually know the things and the kids don't know the things. And of course, it has been true for many years, maybe for all of humankind, that parents don't actually know all the things.
And actually, children tend to know more.
The kids actually do know more sometimes. This has probably always been the case.
Yeah.
But we're at an interesting moment right now where none of us, outside of, a very small sector of the tech industries, know much about AI. And we have a lot of misconceptions and a lot of myths. And this can seem daunting, but it's an opportunity to learn together. And there's all kinds of cool literature on this, academic literature on this, on how to like adopt this as a perspective. But I think a lot of parents actually do it intuitively. When they see their kid learning something, they'll often kind of be like, "Oh, and what are you doing now?" And "Oh, show me how to do this." And we do it with like really little kids, and then we kind of seem to forget as our kids get into, starting doing like, I don't know, like more advanced math and stuff. And it's like we're trying to help them from a more top-down type of way. But if we can kind of go back to that, where we were all sitting on the floor, kind of like showing each other how to work it, but do this with AI. Oh, let's try to get the AI to say something they're not supposed to say. Let's try to. We have the safety settings on. Let's see if we can make it say a swear word. Even though it's supposed to be filtered. And then learning together, but also acknowledging when your child is getting something quicker and asking them to show you how they did it. It can seem to be really like disempowering for parents, but there's actually, when we're dealing with something like this, it's such a new realm. It's actually more empowering and more trust. It's more conducive to trust building between the parents and the children, which is really what we need. When we're talking about kids locking themselves in their room, talking to a chatbot who's telling them all kinds of dark, horrible things, and they're afraid to tell us because they don't want their phone taken away. That's a trust issue in many ways. I'm not letting the chatbot designers off the hook. That shouldn't be happening at all. But when something unexpectedly, horrible happens, who do you go to? You have to know that you can go to someone. And so having those kinds of interactions where we're learning about it together, and I can trust you and you can trust me. I have not all the knowledge, but I have like a lot of context knowledge. I'm able to make connections that you aren't able to make because I've been here for 40 years, I've seen all these things, and you are new here. But you have played with these types of, assistants, voice assistants, or NPCs. So you have a better sense of when things are pre-programmed and when they're actually responsive, and so it's more of a reciprocal flattening out of the normal power dynamics, but it can be really helpful because kids actually do have a lot to teach us about these technologies, even the ones that they don't know, because they have a more experimental approach. Because like they have to. They're learning so much about the world. There's so much that they don't understand. Every day they are feeling I don't know everything. They're always feeling like that. So it doesn't halt them the way it does for grown-ups. Like when we feel like we don't know anything, it scares us, right?
We sort of resist. We
resist. We don't want to do it. So anyway, I think that's something that parents can do and look into, like this co-learning. How can we co-learn this together, and how can we have trust? And I think the other part of trust is like, don't jump to bans, because if that is actually like a threat in a kid's life, I will lose access to my video games and therefore access to all of my friends who are playing together without me now, and I'm now feeling lonely and left out. Then maybe the threat of no video games is too much. Maybe that's it's like it has way more weight than you think it's going to have, because you're like, they'll just play something else. You're not realizing what the implications of that are to that little person. So instead of having that threat, have like a way of having open dialogue. Like, did that person just say something to you? Are you talking to someone you don't know? Oh, weird. Why don't you just talk to your friends? Like that, that person could say really horrible things to you.
Yeah.
And, like, be age appropriate in that conversation. But, take it upon yourself to share what the real concerns are. We're worried about screen time, but that's not actually what we're worried about. We're worried about other things. We're worried about not getting enough physical activity. We're worried about strangers approaching you. The worries are actually not as abstract as it sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the way I like to see it, because sort of our generations, we grow up in the real world, and then the digital world kind of was brought upon us, and we started to explore, right? But we can differentiate the difference between the real world and the digital world. What children, the new generation of children now, all they experience is the digital world. They know that the real world exists because they're there. But what I'm seeing, and this is the thing that I absolutely hate to see, how you see, especially politicians, that they kind of attack Gen Z and people like that. Or they say, oh, they're all lazy and they're this and they're that, they're woke and yada, yada, yada. Now, I know all younger generations always been attacked by the older generation, but I've never seen, certainly in my lifetime, that level of vitriol that you see from the older people towards the younger generation, like the way Gen Zers are experiencing. And I think one of the things that you see how, like, I mean, there's probably another conversation, because I think we can speak here for like the next 10 hours at this rate. But I would argue that one of the reasons why you see, for example, a massive rise of Gen Zers getting into things like the manosphere, and I've seen statistics that I've heard in the news, was it today or yesterday, I think, on the radio, where more younger, like, again, the Gen Zers, boys and girls, because people used to think it's the boys that they're suddenly becoming more far right, etc. Actually, girls too. They're not at the same rate, but for some reason, neo-Nazi groups are attracting more younger people. And the key reason that I've heard is, like, what the experts are talking about, is the fact they feel isolated. They feel that the system has failed them. Because, for example, I say young, I mean, I'm talking about people like, say, 18, 20 something year olds. They know that they can't buy a house compared to the baby boomers that complain at Gen Z. They could buy a house at what, $20,000 something, right?
We're giving them away for free.
Exactly. And it's like they're attacking the Gen Zers for, oh, you spend all of your money on avocado sandwiches, and I mean, it's just complete nonsense. And it's like, they feel isolated. They feel that they've been failed by the system. Right. Some feel that they've been failed by their parents. Like you said, like the parents have, again, I'm not here to blame parents, but it's the way we grow up, this sort of bottom down approach that, yeah, the parents knows everything, that we're not engaging with the kids as much. I mean, what my wife and I trying to do with our kids, that we actually play with them. Now, thankfully, because I'm a gamer, I'm probably worse than my kids, but my daughter is a gamer, so she's got my genes. So every time she wants to play a game, she actually wants to play with me. I'm like, all right, let's do this, Minecraft, or she was like, okay, you want to do some, Call of Duty, so I can shoot you. I'm like, oh, go on then. So, and it works. With my son is an avid reader. He's a bookworm like my wife. So the two of them, they read books together and stuff like that, So I absolutely agree with you. That does work a lot, because we have this strange, I don't know what's the term, but there's definitely a chasm that's starting to build between the real world and the digital world. And since the real world is actually failed the younger generations systematically, what do? They escape to the digital world. It's a form of escapism for them. You've got AI that wants to be their friends. You've got, again, the manosphere. Now there's a femisphere as well, something I discovered recently. Actually, I'm going to put a post about it on LinkedIn, because I need women to explain this one to me. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre.
Is it similarly it's like an alt-right extreme? Yeah. Wow.
But it's also, it seems to suggest, I need to finish to read it first, but it seems to suggest that women that fall for this, they're like, okay, we don't want to do any work. We want men to look after us.
Yeah.
And I'm like, huh? There's like, yeah, there's a lot. I have to accept. I need to read it first to make sure I get it right. But it's a new thing that is emerging, and I'm thinking to myself, this is bad. This is really really bad. Yeah, and it just goes to show that we, the real world, the grown-ups, obviously failed them in this. As far as I'm concerned, if they feel that they feel like they don't belong in the real world, and they need that form of escapism, but that digital world now. You see, gaming, perhaps for us, our generation, gaming was a nice thing. But gaming is just gaming. It's fantasy. It's fun. But these are real people with AI. But of course, there are people behind the AI that control the AI as well. That is a very serious problem, in my opinion. I think this is something that we have to tackle. So I absolutely appreciate the point you made that it's that the parents have to now effectively be at the same level as their children when it comes to engagement. It's not about, oh, because I'm the parent, I said so. No. Hey, let's read together. Let's play together. Let's play with AI together. Let's learn AI together. I think that, so far, touch wood, right? It worked in my kids. But it's definitely, I think that's one way forward, because I don't think we can expect anything from governments and corporations anytime soon. So...
I am going to expect them to. I mean, I don't know if they'll follow through, but I think they should feel the fire under their feet from all of us who want this and are expecting them to act.
But will they listen? That's the thing. Because even politicians, because you would think, like, for example, I made the point that in that episode that came out earlier this week, like, we've got the Labour Party. So effectively, you could argue, somebody was laughing with me, an American friend of mine that would say, oh, you guys now are the grown-ups. You've got, you don't have a far right, whatever. I'm like, well, in theory, yeah, we've got a Labour government, but now they announced their AI plan. And they seem to be capitulating to the tech bros as well. And they want to compromise our copyright laws. And it's like, they're denying it. But I know people who are very much involved in this very deeply. And they're saying, no, they are actually trying to compromise our copyright laws. Now, the UK has always been the world leader in the creative industry, in gaming included. We never had issues with copyright. Oh, but suddenly now we need to revise it. So effectively, to me, that's why I don't want to be involved in any political party, because as far as I'm concerned, they're both as bad as each other now. They obviously don't seem to, they care about whatever beliefs that they care about until they get elected. Then I guess, I don't know, reality hits them or something. I have no idea. But you would think, surely, as a government, you should have the power to tell these companies, look, enough, right? You've had your fun now for like 20 plus years. You've got all the data that you want from us. You're sharing it amongst one another illegally. All right, let's stop now. Nope. Let's do more. That's what they're doing right now. So for me, it's frustrating. I think it's really frustrating. I personally can't see. I mean, I made a warning that we're all like a bunch of frogs in the boiling water right now. And the people that are making the water hotter are the government and the corporation. So the question is, should we wait for them to stop making it worse? I personally won't. I think we should figure out a way to get the hell out of the boiling water somehow. But that's why it's my question. What is there a solution? But I mean, I think there's a lot of things we have to do individually, but I guess, like, we have to have these sort of conversations. For the listeners, all the things that Sara mentioned, we're going to put all the links in the description. But is there anything else that you want to promote? I know you wrote a book, right?
Yes, I wrote a book. It's called Digital Playgrounds. And I mean, it's about the recent history of connected games that are targeted to kids. So actually, a lot of the issues that we talked about today, this predates it predates the visible emergence of AI. But all of that data collection, as well as that weirdness that I talked about in terms of like how are kids expressed and represented in data sets. So I talk about like safe chat and, the lack of freedom of expression that kids under 13 in particular have been able to enjoy since like the very beginning, unless they lied about their age. So it looks at a bunch of different games from like the zeros to about 2018. And I think it provides like a really good background in how we got here in terms of regulation. It is a little bit, it's focused more on the US and Canada. But, it's a very impactful location, the US, in terms of setting norms and industry sectors and ways of collecting data and ways of ignoring children's rights. And, kind of at the same time, there's such a huge market. So you want them there and generating data and, consumer purchases. But they've always had like a bit of there's been a tension, and this explains it fairly well. I think it's focused on games, but there's lots of other examples and relevance there. And I'm working on a new book right now that's due at the end of the summer, called Kidfluenced, and it's all about kids and digital content creation. And this one does talk about Gen AI in the later chapters. So it kind of provides a little bit, it's the same type of approach. I think to understand the present and the future, we really do need to understand the past, because a lot of these companies didn't get their start yesterday. They've actually been around for a while, and they've made decisions that have set a status quo, not only for how industry, handles. So for this book, how industry handles content made by kids, but also the larger cultural norms. How do kids and parents and teachers view that relationship? What do they think is normal? And a lot of these decisions could have gone either way, right? Like we could have said children are allowed to have their own YouTube channels, but they have to be moderated and safeguarded. Instead of what happened, which was, well, children, like younger children, aren't allowed, but they can be posted on their parent's site, and the parent is now the one delegated full responsibility. And we're not going to moderate it, in the way that we would if we were trying to guide kids to become these independent media producers or content creators. So these are decisions, and they're political decisions, and they have a lot to do with bottom line and making money. But it's not just that. None of these companies are only responding to that. They're also responding to what governments want and don't care about. And they're responding to public perception. And public perception, it plays a big role in a lot of my analysis. I've been having a lot of fun writing the book, because I've been able to play around with a lot of Gen AI and kind of like from that perspective, and see how companies are accommodating or imagining child users of an image generator, text-based image generator, or text-based video generator. This is fun.
No, sounds great. Now I think we'll probably have to have another conversation then. After I read it, of course. But interesting point about the companies, they care about public perception, but right now they don't seem, I don't know if they do, because they're literally telling us to our faces what they want to do. And it's like, oh, we don't like what you're doing. So, well, we don't care. We paid the new president $1 million. So
yeah, but he didn't get no votes, and I think that they're they're aligning themselves with that tiny but still majority. So I mean, hopefully Canada and the UK stay where the most of our population are not on board with this ridiculousness. But I think that I don't think we should downplay that there are people that are users and consumers that are on board with these harmful decisions.
Well, as I just said earlier, that a lot of the future voters are moving in that direction, the far right direction, and they're the ones that, I mean, I don't know, again, statistically, if it's accurate to say that they're the ones that won him the elections, like the Manosphere won the Trump election, but absolutely they had huge influence, for sure. Oh dear. Well, on this somewhat positive notes-ish, Sarah, Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I mean, I said I enjoy our conversations, and I think we need to have another one for sure, multiple ones probably. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. This was fantastic. Really, really interesting and engaging. Yeah, I would come back anytime.
Thank you. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sara. I told you she was great. Frankly, I don't think there's anything else I can add. I mean, she said it all, didn't she? The only thing that I would emphasize is the point that she made at the end there in terms of how we as parents and carers can engage more with our children. The idea is that we play with them more. We spend time together with them on social media more. So it's not about banning them necessarily, because that's not going to work. I mean, I know a lot of parents are trying and stuff, but let me tell you what works for me. And I know I'm in a very, very privileged situation because I'm an entrepreneur. My wife is an entrepreneur. We're controlling our timetable, so we can do whatever the hell we like. But I know there are millions and millions of parents out there who have multiple jobs, and it's tough. I absolutely get it. And I was there. I mean, I used to be with my wife. We were young parents as well in our 20s when we had our first child. So it is tough. But as I said so many times, and I'll continue saying it, that we are on our own. I mean, if you think the government is just going to regulate this, well, I've been campaigning and pushing for regulation since 2014. Not much has happened. I mean, they've done a few things here and there, but as Sara highlighted, our children are still pretty much at risk. I mean, they're totally ignored. If you're thinking that the tech bros, the Elon Musks of the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world will give a shit, well, they didn't give a shit all this time. All these issues that we've highlighted as well, all of that happened under their watch. What would change now? And I'm recording this particular part of the episode post the inauguration of Donald Trump, and they've already started to deregulate AI, as I've warned on this video over here about what AI is going to look like under Trump's presidency. I mean, like I said, this is all, the writing was on the wall all along. So I'm afraid we have to do everything ourselves. We have to, in fact, we look after one another where we can. And this is why I've got this podcast. I want to make sure that we create a community where we take control of the situation and make sure that the tech sector serves us and not the other way around, as I've been saying all the time. So what works for me with my wife as well is that we engage with our kids. So we actually, we spend time together on social networks. And, as I mentioned to Sara as well, that I'm a gamer. My daughter is a gamer. So we play together a lot. I spend a lot of time. My daughter, she's very much into social media. I spend personally a lot of time with her on social media. My wife does the same thing as well. And what we kind of allow them to do is to discover the environment themselves and make a decision themselves. So for example, my son, when he was quite young, he didn't like social media. He was like, you know what? I'm not interested in this garbage. He's 18 now. And I keep on asking him, hey, do you want to go on social media? He's like, no. He has literally zero interest in social media. Our daughter, for instance, she decided that she cannot stand Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and all of that stuff because it's all Mark Zuckerberg stuff, which I'm like, how do you even know Mark Zuckerberg? But okay, I'm not going to, she obviously does know somehow, but she's totally have no interest in that. She's not that particularly interested in TikTok, but she really likes YouTube and she really likes Pinterest because she loves arts. She's into arts and anime and all these things. So she basically explores the community that does exist apparently on YouTube and Pinterest. So we allow them to kind of make that decision themselves, and they know that we are there to support them. And if anything goes wrong, they come to us and say, hey, mommy, daddy, this is kind of weird. Hey, that's cool. Don't worry. Just show me what happened. Yeah, that's fine. We have a chat, stranger danger type conversation, that's cool. Nothing wrong here. Don't worry about it. Just, be careful next time. Like, try to avoid sort of the punishment language, because I did a video. This actually reminds me of a video that I put on TikTok. Make sure you follow us on TikTok, CEO Retort as well. And I think I put a video at least a year ago where there was this horrendous story about the rise of sextortion amongst children. So basically, people targeting young children, boys and girls, and basically drag them into sextortion. And then a lot of these kids basically feel embarrassed. They don't want to tell their parents about it. And they end up in this mental spiral that leads to, again, self-harm, suicide, etc. So make sure you provide that environment as a parent where you say, look, maybe I'm not spending that much time with you on social media, but hey, whatever happens, the school, just come and tell me, we're here to help. I think that's probably the key message that we should probably all take away from what Sara was saying. So if you can't spend that extra time with your kids because of the work, etc., I said, I absolutely get it. But at least emphasize the message that they're not going to be punished if something goes wrong online. that you're there to protect them, you're there to support them, you're there to go through that, hopefully not a painful experience, but if it is even a painful experience, that you're going to go through them together. I think that's probably the key point. And I am very upset about this because, like I said, I've warned about this. Many of us back in the day, we warned that this is going to happen if we do not put guardrails around AI before you push AI on the web. And that was like over 10 years ago. And like I said, everything that we see today was preventable. They chose not to prevent it. And sometimes, I think to myself, I'm a tech entrepreneur. I'm proud to say that none of my creations over the years, 20 plus years, in fact, as an entrepreneur, led children to self-harm or anybody to do anything like that. Okay, to be fair, I've always been business to business. I've never been involved with the consumer market. Apart from this podcast, actually, it's my first exposure to the consumer market. But generally speaking, my philosophy was always about making sure we protect our customers, we protect our end users. And I just wonder, I'm going to end this episode with this thought. At some point, these founders woke up one day knowing that there were thousands of children that committed suicide, harmed themselves. In fact, adults did the same thing as a direct result of their technology. There must have been a day where they woke up and they were like, you know what? It's not nice, but hey, it's collateral damage. We need to continue. What kind of mindset do you have for you to kind of accept that this is just part of the plan or part of the mission? I can't accept that. That's the reason why I walked away, just as an FYI. But I find that really strange. I really find that very strange and sad to see, and quite horrific, because at the end of the day, without us, the consumers, without you, these platforms would not exist. But you are their customers, but they don't treat you as such. And that's bad. This is why I call for ethics. Many of us have been calling for ethics for a very long time. But, like I said, we have each other now. We need to do that together. And this is why I'm bringing amazing people like Sara. And as I said earlier, we're going to have multiple conversations in the future because this is a huge topic and things will evolve. Unfortunately, as I said, 2025 is going to be a year where we're going to see more negative stories than positive, I'm afraid, when it comes to AI and tech and social media. So therefore, I know Sara will be right on the game there. And we're going to be discussing this frequently. And as usual, my friends, any questions that you have, you can comment below or you can email us. Again, I really appreciate your emails. Thank you very much for that. editors@ceoretort.com. And again, special thanks for the key sponsors of this episode, specifically Ground News. Make sure you check them out at ceoretort.com/ground news. You get 40%. You can also see the link in the description below, and as well as all of the other sponsors as well underneath them. And make sure, again, there's a big favor, subscribe on our YouTube channel. You hit the subscription button and the like button. It really makes a massive difference to the algorithms. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give us 5 stars. All of that makes a massive, massive difference. It costs you absolutely nothing. But if you have cash to spare, as you know, you're very welcome to become a member at CEO Retort/join. And my friends, on that note, stay safe, keep your kids safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.